Like once we took shop class out of high school, we basically sent a real clear message to a whole generation of kids that these jobs aren't even worth looking at. They're not even worth walking down the hallway on the way from English to arithmetic or whatever, to stick your head in there to see somebody fabricating wood or metal or auto shop.
What is up, everybody? My name is Jesse, and I'm one of the producers here at Ironclad, and it is the end of 2025. So for this very special episode that is dropping on New Year's Eve, we wanted to bring you some of our favorite moments from change agents presented by Firecracker Farms. Now, we look back at some of the best interviews that Andy had done all year. Now, first up, we want to bring you a conversation with Mariana Van Zeller. You may know her from her new podcast, The Hidden Third, or from Nat Geo's Trafficked. Recently, she sat down with Andy to talk about the prevalence of Mexican drug cartels in hidden parts of America. Here's a really stirring part of that conversation.
Let's just go with a blank canvas. Let's assume that the listeners and viewers don't really have an understanding. We can talk about what cartels are, even though I think probably most people have heard the term and maybe have some association with it. So maybe let's focus on, in your reporting, if you could explain just how powerful the cartels have become in the U.S., the size of their presence, and maybe even dive into what makes their influence seemingly so difficult to either dismantle or destroy. I know that's a super broad question, but it allows us to go from big to small.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the shocking things that we found out, I've been covering the cartel for many years now. I think I've reported more from Sinaloa and Mexico than anywhere else in the world outside of the U.S. And I think what even shocked me was when we started, I realized, having reported on the cartel, that they have a huge presence here in the U.S. But so I wanted to do a story about just what is that presence? What does that mean for the U.S.? How is it what impact is it having on law enforcement, on society at large? And I think one of the things that shocked me as soon as we started reporting was realizing that a lot of these cells are operating from small town America. So, we usually think drug violence, we think big criminal organizations, we tend to think New York, LA, Chicago. But through our reporting, what we found out is when we started wanting to meet with these cartel operators here in the U.S., that a lot of them were operating, again, in really small town American, even as far as Alaskan, like small towns in Alaska. And we, one of the scenes we filmed was with Georgia Bureau of Investigations. They have a great team out there, and we were in sort of rural Georgia doing where we interviewed two agents who had basically brought down a cartel cell operation that was operating in rural Georgia, where it was a crazy, crazy story. They got a call from a guy who owns a cottage in the woods and rents it on Airbnb. And they got a call, 911 got a call from this guy saying, I have my surveillance cameras outside my house, my Airbnb, and I'm seeing they're bringing in like a body into my Airbnb rental. And
What?
Yeah, it was crazy. It's insane. And the police, the local police went there and realized that there was something bigger happening, because basically they brought in the body and then left with bags or something that was suspicious to the owner of this Airbnb rental. And the police was called, and then eventually the FBI was called, and the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, were called. And what they found was that there was this woman who, the leader of this cartel cell in Georgia, she was a drug distributor for them, and that the leader believed that she was skimming money from him. And so they had called her into this house, and they had tortured her in a bathtub. They had cut off her, I think it was a chainsaw, cut off parts of her body. They had used pliers to cut off her fingers. But they had done a really good job of cleaning it all out. So they couldn't find any evidence that this had happened, but they knew something had happened here. So it was this agent that when they started looking inside, they decided to open the drain for the bathtub and realized that there was lots of evidence there. And again, this is like small town America. with a cell that's sort of connected to the cartel. So yeah, this is unfortunately happening all across the U.S.
Would you say they have presence in all 50 states?
I would say yes, absolutely. I mean, through our reporting, finding out that everywhere. I mean, we spoke to sources that had presence in Alaska or that talked about operations in Alaska and North and South Dakota. I mean, yeah, it was wild. I didn't expect it. And I think to me, a couple of other things that were really shocking in that story was, first of all, we interviewed a guy who was American, El Gringo, who goes by the name of El Gringo, obviously not his real nickname, but he's American, born and raised in the U.S., doesn't even speak Spanish, and is one of the biggest distributors for the cartel here in the United States. And for me, that was shocking. And he told me that that is actually quite common too, that they use a lot of American citizens to distribute their drugs. So to me, that was surprising. I didn't know that was. I knew that obviously they work with some collaboration from Americans, but I didn't know it was so widespread. And then the other thing was that the corruption angle, and the agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation spoke to me about this. A bunch of different law enforcement groups I've spoken to have talked about this, but there is so much money that we're talking about, right? It's the drug business alone. It's estimated at over $600 billion a year, billion. So, and the cartel is making, billions of dollars from this illegal trade. And when you're talking about this much money, it's easy, unfortunately, to corrupt people, but, we're talking about border patrol, we're talking about small town sheriffs, but we're talking about federal agencies as well. And that was the scariest part is, with the cartel, they bring in the violence, they bring in the drugs, the deadly drugs, but they are also bringing in corruption. And once that affects our government, obviously that's a huge problem for all of us.
All right, so a few months back, Andy got the opportunity to sit down with ethical hacker Ryan Montgomery, who told him a really crazy story about what happened when he tried to confront a cash mule in a Lowe's parking lot. Here it is.
Something interesting that we just did, which will be on YouTube probably in the next couple weeks or a month, is a cash mule. Are you familiar with a cash mule, like somebody that picks up cash and sends it to a foreign country?
I guess I've heard about that a little bit. Is it essentially I think I've heard this through people muling. They're trying to convert crypto into actual cash, and maybe that is a part of this in some way. But
it's the other way around. So you're turning cash into crypto and then sending it to another country. So this is what happened, and we did a lot. In the last 7 days, I flew in late last night. I was there. We were staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning all week, getting a couple hours of sleep every night. But we did a lot. We were hacking scammers all week. We were dealing with the feds. We were trying to deal with the local police for this one sting. But the rest of it was just getting onto these scammers' computers and trying to save victims is the main goal. And then the secondary goal, well, it's a little more hard to accomplish, is getting them arrested or raided by the local feds or the CBI in India. So what ended up happening one of the days is we get into a Chinese Telegram chat between all of these different people, and we were pretending to be an Indian scammer, saying that we have somebody that has $40,000 in cash, and they want to meet to drop off that cash. We have no idea, what the intricacies of that one specific scam is, or at least I wasn't, up to speed with it yet. And we're pretending to be the Indian, saying that we have the Indian scammer, that we have the cash and we want to meet. So we give a location of where we're at, and the Chinese, it's almost like a call center. They dispatch somebody from Georgia, which was a 4-hour drive to meet with us, to meet us in a Lowe's parking lot. So they're thinking they're meeting up with somebody. They don't know who they're meeting up with. We don't even know what the cash mule looks like. We don't know what kind of car they're in. We just know that they're going to be there in 4 hours. And we're trying to, we're calling police. We're calling, we dealt with the feds. The feds, the HSI specifically, said that they were going to have somebody, meet us there and handle it, but they didn't have a big enough team at that short of notice to do it. And the guy was already on his way. So, what are we going to do? Tell them to turn around, and it was the last day. So,
can you hold off a little bit? We're trying to interface with a government agency to get set up. You're moving too quickly.
Exactly. So we're all like, it's unbelievable. Like I'm in the middle of a podcast at this point, like doing like a side podcast for his channel.
Yes.
And right in the middle of the podcast, they're like, "Oh, we gotta go." So I jump up out of the chair in the middle of like, just like as if we're talking right now. I jump up out of the chair, and we all pile up into cars. There's multiple cars. We got drones in the air. We got people with cameras, like giant, like huge, like news-looking cameras. We have people on their phones. We have it's unbelievable what we pulled off with no preparation. Like, because we really were hoping that HSI or the local police, bare minimum, were gonna assist. So we're all laid up there. According to the chats, they were looking for a black Tesla, and we show up in a black Tesla. Everybody's got their seat all the way back. Everybody's leaning back except for the driver, who's scammer payback, but he has blue hair, so he's wearing a hat to cover up the blue hair. And we're looking around, and we see this woman to our right, and the woman takes a picture of the black Tesla, and we're like, this is definitely her. So everyone's got their cameras on this woman, and not even like 3-4 minutes later, this kid comes up. Maybe he looks like he's in his early 30s, and he gets in the car and he just starts making out with him. And there's cameras recording this woman. We're like, not the person. So we're like, oh crap, did we just miss them? Because we thought that was we didn't know if it was a male or female that was coming to pick that cash up. But we start to notice a guy is walking out of the Lowe's. As we start to get our attention back to what the situation is, we see a guy walking out of the Lowe's, and he's looking all around the parking lot. He looks sketchy. He looked Asian, and that kind of matched the description of who was dispatching the people. And he gets in his car and starts driving, and we see that he's driving through the parking lot, and then we decided to follow him a couple car lengths away. And he circles around the parking lot while he's looking around, he obviously was doing something sketchy. So he kept going around the parking lot, and eventually he pulls over. We see him look at his phone again. So he just left Lowe's. He just circled the parking lot, and now he's sitting in a parking space. But what do you do at that point? If you walk up to his car, we're thinking he's just going to drive away. And if you box him in, we're falsely imprisoning him, and we're not officers, we're not law enforcement. You can't do that. So we were trying to think of the best way, and if we bring cameras out, of course he's gonna run. But bare minimum, we got his plate, and at that time at least, his plate was a Georgia plate, and that didn't match any of the plates in this parking lot. So we were pretty sure it was the right person, and I'll explain more in a second of how we kind of confirmed it was. But I'm like, nobody here has tattoos, and I'm gonna stereotype myself. And I'm just gonna, I'm gonna walk up to his car, because and make it appear like I'm the one who is going to be delivering him the cash. And I walk up to his car by myself, which I know is a stupid, risky thing to do, but I wanted him to be exposed. And who knew if he rented that car, or what if we never were able to expose the guy? So I go up to his window and I said, "Hey, I have the box in my car," or whatever words that I said to him. And he seemed like he didn't fully understand what I was saying. But then I pulled out the Translate app, and he seemed like he was understanding that. He gets out of the car, because now everybody's circling the car with cameras and all that hectic stuff I was talking about. But at this point, he already would have been on camera. He gets out, and I'm worried, maybe he has a gun on him or something that I should be worried about. So I asked him, lift up your shirt, and I didn't identify as an officer or anything like that. I just said, lift up your shirt. He listened to me, lifted his shirt up, and as soon as he puts his shirt down, I said, give me your ID. I just immediately went right into it. The guy hands me his ID. I took a picture of it on my phone, and he walks into the Lowe's. He's shaky. He's definitely being super nervous. He's saying that he's a delivery driver from Uber. He's got some international delivery bag that they have a video of in the car. None of his stories make sense. I asked him to name 3, because he said he was in town for the week, according to the Translate app. To name 3 streets in this city. Couldn't do that. I pulled up my phone with 911 on it. And he was like, no. Like he didn't want, police. He's walking around the Lowe's, panicking. He's grabbing Tide laundry pods, putting them back, black contractor bags, putting them back, electrical receptacles. He pulls them. I don't know why he thought he needed them. But, at this point, I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Just talk or police? Talk or police? And then He finally gets to one aisle and he grabs rubber gloves. I don't know why, but he grabs blue rubber gloves, puts them in a cart, and goes to check out. And we're like, so you came back in here with a cart to look for rubber gloves. It just made no sense whatsoever. So I had that photo of his ID. I mean, he drives away, and that was it. We were send all that information to law enforcement, everything we possibly could. But I have his ID and the address. I see it said limited term driver's license, which means he's here on a visa. And
I didn't even know that existed, actually.
I did not either. So I had to Google it for Georgia, limited term driver's license. And, he's here on a visa. And I had the home address that he was coming from. And the house was, like a $700,000 house, according to Zillow. Very nice house, it looked like. And we compared, because in that chat with the Chinese, people that dispatch the cash mules, they sent a screenshot of the GPS, like how far away the guy was. And we put the home address in to the Lowe's where we're at, and it matched the exact shape of, a 4-hour drive. So we knew that from that alone is a smoking gun, and all of the other pieces. He did not admit to going there to pick up the cash, but he was the only Georgia plate in the parking lot, and all of the other things just lined up. There's absolutely zero chance that he was not the guy. Yeah. And I hope that if nothing happens with law enforcement or the feds or whatever, I hope that scared him enough to not do it again. But at the end of the day, that money was, most likely, there was no real money in this case, but this happens all the time. And this is this is people's grandparents' life savings. This is, your mother, your father, this is what they worked their whole life for. And some guy is going to be taking that from them in a Lowe's parking lot and never going to be seen again. So, that type of stuff outside of the child safety breaks my heart. And, that's why I have a passion for that as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is full-on holiday season. So if you're still looking for an awesome gift that actually has some substance, I highly recommend Firecracker Farm Hot Salt. It's a product that I personally use every day, and I can stand behind it. Delicious really is an understatement. It has the perfect heat to flavor ratio that you can fully control and elevates everything you put it on, from eggs to steak to chicken, or even something as simple as pasta that you may not traditionally think about putting salt on. The gear is solid too. It comes in a really nice, well-built stainless steel push grinder that feels right in your hand. It has a great tactile quality that makes it super satisfying to use, and I'm telling you, you're gonna want this thing, and it makes an awesome gift. The best part is, when you buy one, you're supporting a small American family business, and you're buying something that's truly high quality that you'll use every single day. Alex and his family have put a ton of love and dedication into this product, and I'm not the only one that recognizes a good thing when I see it. You can now find this product at Black Rifle Coffee locations, to include the one here in Kalispell. That should tell you everything that you need to know about the quality of the people and the product. There's one small catch. You are not going to find this on Amazon last minute. They make hot salt in small batches, and inventory goes very quickly. So if you want this, you need to make your move now. They are going to sell out. Head over to firecracker.farm and use the code Ironclad, all one word, all caps, at checkout for 10% off of your order. Do it now, and you're going to be the holiday hero. Thank me later. That is firecracker.farm. Today's episode is brought to you by Delete Me. We have talked a lot about people getting caught in timeshare scams, falling for pig butchering schemes, or getting those mysterious text messages that you have no idea where they came from. I've spoken with guests who hunt hackers and work to protect people's personal information. But here's the thing. Your data, your personal data, your name, your address, your phone number, even your relatives' names can be bought and sold online by data brokers, putting you at risk for identity theft, scams, and harassment. Now, that is why we have partnered with Delete Me. Like the experts we've had on the show who actively stop hackers and scammers, Delete Me works behind the scenes to remove your personal information from hundreds of people search and data broker sites. They do it continuously, securely, and without outsourcing. Plus, real privacy advisors are available for custom requests, so you're never on your own. Delete Me has been the leading service for removing personally identifiable information for over 15 years. They verify your data is actually on these sites before requesting removal, reducing unnecessary exposure. Wirecutter named them the #1 service of its kind, and judges, journalists, creators, and podcasters all trust Delete Me to protect their privacy. Nowadays, this isn't just a nice to have. I feel like it's an essential. And Delete Me makes it super easy. Just create your account, enter in your basic information on the dashboard, and they're going to do the rest. Within about a week, the first report arrives showing exactly what has been removed. Take control of your digital privacy today at joindeleteme.com/ironclad and use the coupon code Ironclad, all one word, all uppercase. You can also scan the QR code to get started. It's one of the few services actively keeping your personal information out of the wrong hands.
Also this year, Andy got a chance to sit down with Borderland Dispatch's host Katarina Schultz, who gave him an overview of the full scope of the cartel war between the Sinaloa Cartel and the CJNG.
From somebody who has been living amongst this and talking with people who are in this world, can you give an actual size, scope, and scale of these organizations and talk about how it's not just, yes, there is the violence. Yes, they are involved in human trafficking and drug smuggling and all that, but just how far their tentacles actually reach out, because it is far more than that. And for people who don't have the chance for these conversations, they hit the wave tops and they think because they only get the wave tops that it should be an easy solution. But I think once you explain how far and permeated their influence is, it breaks it down for people a little bit, the complexity.
Okay, so it's very deep rooted, right? And I mentioned how it's rooted within the government, and then these cartels also are employing thousands of people internationally too, by the way, and have endless resources and money to continue moving this operation along. And then also it's entrenched in the culture. So, our music and movies and celebrities down here sing and talk about and glamorize the narco cartel culture and also become victim of it. I mean, just recently in Mazatlan, Sinaloa, Grupo Frontera, which is like a music group, was going to perform at the carnival there. And there's these things called narcomantas, which are basically like banners that have handwritten threats on them. Sorry, before they were about to perform, one of those banners showed up with a decapitated head on it saying, if Grupo Frontera performs, we'll kill everyone, including the guy who turns on the lights. So it is so, yeah. And this is something that's been going on for years. I mean, we could go back to when Chalino Sanchez was a very famous Mexican singer, was assassinated after he performed, and there's this viral sort of video that's turned into a meme where as he's about to sing the song Alma Enamorada, someone hands him a note and he reads it and he's like sweating, and people assume that was the threat of him, either stop your performance or don't sing the song or you're dead. Well, but also the way that a lot of people are growing up is, my dad was in the cartel, my uncle, my older brothers, my neighbor. So what am I going to do when I grow up? You think that kid's going to decide to become a fucking dentist? No. So, and then also in a lot of smaller towns, perhaps, the cartel is also putting money into building those areas up, sort of like what Pablo Escobar did and why he was kind of referred to as Robin Hood. They're building schools, they're fixing up the hospitals, they're paying for certain kids' tuitions, they're paying for certain people's medical bills. In a way, they're doing charity for certain communities. And so when that's happening, it's really hard to convince these people who are already struggling financially to say, no, fuck these guys, they're the bad guys. How would you view them as the bad guys if, say, for example, this person just paid for your mom's cancer treatment? And so they have found ways to entrench themselves so deeply into Mexican communities, the culture, the government, politics, right? And so when that's the case, how do you go about dismantling organizations that are entrenched in every aspect of people's daily lives? Of course, there are a lot of people who do not fuck with the cartels and hate them. And, they live in Mexico and they say, we see so much violence, there's so much crime, we're tired of it. And my son has been missing for the last 10 years and I don't know where he was. And he wasn't even involved in this, because there's also a lot of cases of kidnapping people, it's mistaken identity, or murdering people. And what are the cartels they're going to do? They're sorry, accident, And so there's a lot of suffering, but then there is a lot of charity that's being done by these guys in certain areas. And that's, in my opinion, very hard to dismantle, because when the community has your back, I mean, come on, there's been instances where we can go back to the 2019 Culiacanazo in Culiacan, when El Chapo Guzman's son was arrested, Ovidio, and the city broke out into war. There was shootouts between the police and the narcos and the public, and people were even backing up the narcos, because at that time in Culiacan, the Chapitos were even doing what I'm saying. They were paying for people's education, paying their medical bills. And so then the government comes in, and then war breaks out. It's such a convoluted topic, because I don't know how you could end something that's so deeply entrenched. And I sort of compare it to, like, gangster rap in the 90s, where that was glamorized in California and
for sure.
the East Coast. But this is so much more beyond that, just because they almost run a lot of the regions of Mexico as if they were the government. I mean, some people even say, like, the cartels are the Mexican government, and the Mexican government, it operates like a cartel, because they profit off of the, allegedly profit off of the cartels. And then the cartels are running a lot of their regions that they have strongholds over, like as if they are the government. So to really understand just how deeply entrenched the cartels are in Mexico and also internationally, I mean, even in Canada, a lot of my sources over there, they have ties with the cartels. The cartels are actively there, bringing in the precursors for fentanyl, producing it and trafficking it, employing, the straw buyers or traffickers. And so that kind of thing complicates it even more too, because when you have all these other countries and different nationalities, people who aren't Mexican, people who didn't grow up in cartel culture, are now being employed by these very men. This is an international operation. And so for a lot of Americans, if they say, well, why don't we just go in there and just take them down? It's not. I get those comments all the time.
Well,
it's
that
not
comment
like
or
that.
question, I want to believe it comes from a good place, but I feel like that comment or question comes from somebody who they don't understand how the world works. They're looking for light switch solutions where you just hit one thing and it changes. And the reality is it's more like a stereo equalizer, but there's 500 knobs. And you have to move them all a little bit at a time, because every time you move one, another one shifts. I wish it was a light switch solution. I really do, but
Of course, I think most do.
Yeah, it's anything but.
It really is. It's so hard to tackle it. And then, people ask me sometimes, what do we need to do, or what should be done? And I don't know, because first of all, that's not my job. I'm not a political scientist. I just go and tell the stories and I gather information. But also because every time there's a crackdown, or, they grab the big guy, someone else comes up out of the woodworks. I mean, right now, something that we're not seeing as much, we're not talking about, is the fact that the Sinaloa Cartel, which has had a stronghold on Mexico for the longest time and has been a super powerful cartel, since the infighting began between the two factions of that cartel on September 9th, that cartel has been struggling. And there's another cartel called the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which right now, is operating so under the radar that, I mean, I give it 2 years, maybe max, and they're just going to be like the cartel. Because, of course, because the Sinaloa Cartel is failing. It's like a house of cards falling in on itself. And, everyone is focused on that. The American CIA planes are flying over Sinaloa, gathering intel to capture these guys. But once you dismantle that cartel, and it's been dismantling over the past couple of months, CJNG, which is a very powerful cartel and notoriously very violent. I mean, we've seen violence, but then there is also a level of propaganda that makes people believe it's like very violent. They're right now probably laughing. I mean, the leader of the Jalisco Cartel, El Mencho, on the same day that those 29 were extradited to the United States, his wife was released from jail. And it just makes me wonder, what? And his brother, who was in jail, was not extradited. And it's like, what's going on? This is going to be that next top dog of cartels in Mexico, in the United States and Canada too, actually. They're going to be the ones running it.
All right, in one of our most watched interviews of all of 2025, Andy talked with Mike Benz about how intelligence agencies manipulate social media algorithms and also have been involved in COINTEL programs throughout American history. Here's Mike Benz.
The head of the CIA makes less than $300,000 a year. The number two makes barely over $200K. You make more than that as a third-year associate at an average large New York law firm, where your job is mostly correcting typos and listening in on partners. You make your career in the CIA by doing favors for the larger stakeholders in the ecosystem. You know, when Mike Pompeo, for example, went from the head of the CIA under the Trump administration to the head of the State Department, that was a major, major promotion. When Leon Panetta went from the head of the CIA under Bill Clinton to the head of the Defense Department, that was a major, major promotion. The CIA is just a support group, and you make your career by doing favors for the larger players in the ecosystem, because only you are uniquely able to use the classification system and the plausible deniability and to do it and get away with it, because you are licensed to create, you know, the shell companies and the money laundering and all the things that would ordinarily be crimes if a civilian did it, but which are protected by the U.S. Justice Department when they're done in the name of promoting U.S. national interests through intelligence activity. And so you make your career by essentially abusing that license to crime, that license to lie that only the intelligence agencies are formally allowed to have. And so when you see this mass infiltration of Facebook or YouTube or Twitter 1.0 into the trust and safety teams to control the algorithms and to control the distribution of information, what you see alongside that is major power players from the State Department, major power players from the Defense Department, major power players from NATO, who are providing that sort of top-down policy directive. And the folks who are the intel people who go in and infiltrate are essentially just carrying out what the consensus vision on how to alter those policies are. And I can give examples of that if you're interested. But.
Yeah, I am interested, because I was going to ask you, a follow-up question. And for people who don't know, at a super broad level, our intelligence organizations, by design, by charter, by doctrine, are supposed to be externally facing, right? Right. And you've talked about in some of your description earlier, you're talking largely about the difference between Title 10 and Title 50 authorities and how they blend, one being military authorities, the other one being intelligence authorities. I was going to ask you about your thoughts on how much, though, of people, they want to believe that our agencies are looking outward and protecting us, right? With a wall or a veil or whatever it may be.
Right.
I get very concerned, and I think people have every right to be concerned, because we keep finding instances of what you're talking about, let's say infiltration of social media networks, where these tools are starting to be turned internally, which is by definition and doctrine not what they're supposed to be used for. So I would love to hear some of those examples that you have of that happening, because I think it's important to point out that A, that's happening, but B, it was never supposed to be that way by design. Like there's such a tight weave and overlap of those things.
Well, it's funny because, we started this section on the NED by talking about why an NED had to be created, which was because of the scandals of the 1970s when the CIA was doing the exact same thing. They were operating on domestic soil. Mm-hmm. They were infiltrating U.S. college campuses. They were influencing U.S. newspaper organizations. They were, even things like MK Ultra were being run out of New York and San Francisco. But this is because, there's a few ways they justify this. The most pernicious of them all, just to use our phrase here again, I guess.
I appreciate it.
Is that there's always been this magic trick to get out of the foreign-facing restriction on intelligence by slipping a cute little word in front of intelligence called counterintelligence, which is this idea that intelligence agencies are supposed to face outward. But if you slip the word counter in front of that and you call it counterintelligence, you're allowed to do intelligence activities domestically on the homeland, ostensibly to stop foreign intelligence agencies from infiltrating the homeland. So, for example, think about like Russiagate. Peter Strzok was the head of counterintelligence for the FBI. And how was it that you had the CIA, you had Misfud, and you had all these characters, whose what allowed such a sprawling? Why was the NSA, for example, able to read Tucker Carlson's signal messages? This is the NSA is an intelligence agency tucked within the U.S. military. Their military is not supposed to act against U.S. citizens. They're supposed to face abroad. Well, they can justify that under the word counterintelligence. Same thing with FISA. Same thing with Russiagate, which is this concept that all of the protections that Americans are supposed to have against the foreign firewall, the domestic firewall against intelligence activities, is when in order to protect Americans against foreign intelligence activity, we are allowed to spy on or take action against Americans who are suspected of being witting or unwitting assets in a hostile foreign intelligence activity. So if you are suspected of being a pawn of the Russians or a pawn of the Iranians or the Chinese, then the CIA can tap all of your electronic devices. The NSA can tap all of your electronic devices, can monitor you, can spy on you as if they were spying on a citizen in a foreign country, under the idea that they need to spy on you in order to spy on foreign spies. But the problem is in the process of that, they do what's called incidental bulk collection, which is that in order to see what you're saying or potentially communicating with Russians or Chinese or Iranians or Venezuelans, in order to read that, they need to read everything in order to be able to cull from that what is specific to their identified counterintelligence threat. So all it takes is one rogue actor who's reading everything they're now spying on you as if you had no constitutional protections. If they were to simply leak that to the press, as they've done hundreds of times in the past 4 years, if they were to simply, this allows you to put a target on your back, and now suddenly they have all the other predicates for a crime, everything else that you're doing. It's the perfect weapon for abuse. And this is not a new thing. As I mentioned, when I mentioned things like COINTELPRO or Operation Chaos or Mockingbird or any of these things, the COINTELPRO is a great example of this. A lot of people are familiar with what the FBI and the CIA did to Martin Luther King. Mm-hmm. Well, Martin Luther King, prior to all of this, he was a controversial figure when he was a civil rights leader, but he ultimately ended up merging the civil rights movement cause with the anti-Vietnam cause. And when he did that, that was when the COINTELPRO ensnarement hit him. And the justification for the FBI wiretap and the FBI COINTELPRO activities against Martin Luther King was not his civil rights activity. It was that he was his primary sponsor was a guy named Stanley Levison. And Stanley Levison was deeply involved in the Communist Party. He was alleged to have ties to the Soviets. And so the reason why when Martin Luther King was assassinated, he fell into the arms of a man that was later unveiled was actually a CIA informant. The reason by the end, all of Martin Luther King's inner circle were either FBI or CIA informants, was because he was being surveyed as under a counterintelligence predicate that he was being potentially backed by the Russians during the heat of the Cold War. because his financial sponsorship came from this Stanley Levison character. But that's all it takes to be able to create a Truman Show out of your life and have all your new friends be federal informants. But this is what happened to speech on the internet. And the first wave of internet censorship was not misinformation about COVID vaccines or about what you say about climate change. The crowbar to it all, the thing that normalized it, was the idea that we needed to have a censorship function to stop the Russians from being able to influence narratives. And this is what really solidified the connective tissue between Facebook and the CIA, between YouTube and the ODNI, between Twitter and the State Department, is this idea that we need to stop propaganda and then any false news story that came from a foreign source was a counterintelligence threat, effectively. But that was sort of allowed in because how are you going to argue against a national security threat? If the CIA and 17 intelligence agencies all say this thing was real, and Christopher Wray is threatening to leave his new job as director of the FBI if Trump doesn't agree with this assessment, it was hard to stop that politically in its infant stages, in part because the Trump White House was not prepared to deal with it. It was something our country had never really seen before. But once that was normalized, it was just a hop, skip, and a jump to saying, well, we're doing this anyway for Russian-facing things. When Russiagate died in July 2019, they simply said, well, we've already toxified the concept of disinformation so much, we're just going to transition it to domestic disinformation. And when that did not generate lawsuits and prosecutions and political pushback for 3 years, effectively, until the Disinformation Governance Board and Elon Musk acquisition and the turnover of the House in 2022, that was really when, crap hit the chandelier.
I want to thank our partners over at Ammo Squared. They've built what they call America's Ammunition Reserve. Basically, this is an ammo savings account. You can sign up, pick from more than 70 different calibers. You can set an auto-buy budget and either choose a shipping schedule, or you can just let your personal reserve grow. Over time, your ammo stacks up and it's stored for free in their climate-controlled facilities in Texas and Idaho until you are ready to ship. There are no minimums. There's no extra fees. It works whether you have a small budget or you just don't want to drop a few grand all at once. Thank you so much, Ammo Squared, for providing this cool service and for supporting the show.
Also this year, Andy got the opportunity to sit down with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Annie Jacobson, who this year has been writing a lot about nuclear war. They talk about the reality of the nuclear threat and if nuclear disarmament is ever even possible.
I remember what I thought about what military service would be like. I remember thinking about what direct exposure to combat would be like. And I often find the people that have been around a good amount of violence, they're changed by it most often, and they have no desire for exposure to that anymore or for anybody else to be exposed to it. And that was kind of the origin of that question about those directly responsible for these weapons. Knowing what it could cause, it wouldn't surprise me at all if later in life they had a shift or a different mentality and firmly landed on a place where they would never want to see them used. Not that they wanted to see them used while they were in the steward of those, and perhaps even maybe reducing the nuclear arsenal. Which, do you think that that's even possible? Do you think it's ever possible for us to get to a non-nuclear world?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that question, but first I'm going to tell you one interesting coda to this, which is that I asked Richard Garwin. So Richard Garwin is that individual, the physicist who drew the plans for the Ivy Mike bomb, the first thermonuclear, and has advised every president since. I asked him if he regretted what he did. And after a long pause, he said to me, I wish it couldn't have been done.
Oh, interesting.
And what he was saying, and I think about this often, is what he was saying is, if I hadn't done it, someone else would have. I mean, and that's really something to think about when you write about science and technology and war and weapons, as I do. And also, by the way, we know now that the Russians were on the path of designing a thermonuclear weapon and did just a few months after we did. And so you have this real complex catch-22 about science and about technology. But there was a second part of your question, which I wanted to answer, which was interesting. Do you remember what?
I was just wondering if you think it's ever possible, given where we are in 2025, to arrive at a non-nuclear world.
Oh, yes. Okay. So, all right. So another hopeful story. In the 80s, there were, in 1986, there were 70,000 nuclear weapons. 70,000. Today, we have approximately 12,300.
All right, we're making improvements.
So how did we get there? How did we get there? Well, Ronald Reagan was a hawk when he took office. He was working on Star Wars, the strategic defense initiative that put weapons into space. But he watched a television movie called The Day After, which envisioned, it was an ABC TV movie, and it envisioned nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States. And he watched that movie, and his chief of staff, by the way, did not want him to watch it, but he did. And he wrote in his White House journal that he became greatly depressed. But as a result, he reached out to Gorbachev, and he became willing to see the enemy. And keep in mind, in 1983, when that movie came out, the Soviet Union was the twirling mustache bad guy. You know, they were really the arch enemy.
This is the Red Dawn movie.
Yes.
They're invading. Yes.
I mean, and so the fact that Reagan could see Gorbachev as the adversary, not the enemy. You know, you want to kill the enemy, and you want to the adversary is different. You might work with them. And that's what he did. And that is why the world went from 70,000 nuclear weapons in 1986 to where we are today. And the two of them almost signed this treaty that made, that to essentially get rid of all nuclear weapons. It's called Global Zero in the sort of, disarmament world. Do I think we can get there? Well, what I do know is there's a treaty at the United Nations called the TPNW, the Treaty to Prohibit Nuclear Weapons. And it's signed by a majority of the 193 nations of the UN. A majority of them. But not the nuclear-armed nations who still want to keep their arsenals. But when you have a majority of nations, that's half the nations. It kind of goes back to that question we were discussing earlier, which is the people are speaking, they are saying, we don't want these weapons. We don't want so many of them. If you read my book, you realize if nuclear war begins, it ends in annihilation. And so, 70,000 nuclear weapons, my God, 12,300, we're doing better. Can we, if you look in an ideal world, global zero, certainly for the disarmament folks, but how about moving toward it?
Yeah.
And that seems very realistic and very practical to me. And again, politics having nothing to do with my reporting, I am certainly optimistic about the current president speaking about denuclearization, speaking about his previous conversations, which many of us didn't even know about, with China and Russia, about the possibility of reducing arsenals. That is a profound step in the right direction.
I agree. Yeah, I agree, and I'm glad that people like that and initiatives like that exist for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so earlier this year, Representative Eric Burleson presented a video to Congress that appeared to show a Hellfire missile striking a UFO or UAP that appeared to deflect it in the video. Well, Eric visited change agents to talk to Andy about that video. Here it is.
Can you tell me about the video you shared with the House Oversight Committee's task force that shows or appears to show a UAP deflecting a Hellfire missile?
Yeah, so this was an interesting video to me, and I was kind of balancing whether or not to release it because you get these videos, you don't know if it's real. It could have been created by AI. It could have been, um, it could have been given to me in a way that to kind of throw water on the effort. So the problem is, if I'd taken time to investigate, to turn it over, and then it may very well have been classified to the point where I couldn't release it. And so at that moment, it wasn't classified. I felt, um, that I had the purview under speech and debate clause to be able to disclose that to at the committee level. And whenever I did bring it up, I made it very clear that I don't know exactly what this video is, and I'm not claiming something, you know, but this is an interesting video, and in the sake of being transparent, I'm gonna release this and let the public decide what this is, rather than have the posture of being protective and guarding. I'm an open hand and an open book, and so that's what we did. And so to me, it's a fascinating video because it shows an object that's flying. You don't know what it is, and then there's a Hellfire missile that comes from the side. Whenever I got the video, it had very, very limited information about it. The location, the date, the fact that it was being filmed off of a drone. Actually, there was one drone that was filming, the other drone had shot the missile, and so that's basically the minimum information that I got. Other than that, apparently the video, I'm told, is longer than the video that was given to me. I've heard that from other people, not it could be the same people. The problem is I don't know who gave me the video, so it was done completely anonymously, and so that's kind of the situation. So that's what we've got, and I felt like releasing it was being open and transparent, and it certainly is an interesting video because some people say, well, it's a balloon. Well, then my question is, why are we shooting a Hellfire missile at a balloon? Why are we engaging in conflict off the coast of Yemen? Now, that could be that there was Houthi activity at that time, and that they were acting under, that there may have been a safety concern, but I don't. And which, if that's the case, why not tell the American people? Why keep that from the American people? I don't. They have no problem with releasing footage of strikes that hit their target. I don't understand why there would be a problem with showing this footage of something that they clearly didn't hit the target, or at least didn't take it out.
Yeah, it's an interesting video. I've watched it a few times, and it's I don't want to say it's odd. I guess I'll just reuse the term interesting. It's interesting that it came to you anonymously with very little info, because I also think there are people out there who are just playing around with the narrative because they like to see people get riled up as well. And I'm not saying that's what's happening with this particular video, but I've watched enough videos from sensors and platforms where you can see that parallax, that orbiting of the platform that's filming it, and it can make it look like there's an incredible lateral speed when it's actually just the parallax. And we shoot Hellfires. I mean, we shoot them at abandoned vehicles, in training or in training environments. I believe that video said that it was confirmed to have come from Syria. Would you put 100% authenticity in that, or is there a chance that it would be in a location outside of Syria?
No, I can't. I don't have any. I couldn't give you that authenticity.
Yeah,
it could have come from somewhere else, but that's the instructions that I was told.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I could see a world where that's a training, like they're showing the accuracy of a Hellfire that clearly didn't detonate, but it was able to hit a balloon in flight, and it was being, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying that's what happened, but I can 100% see a world where that is part of military certification of a weapon, or trying to certify some other capability. But if you want it to be an alien, you see that and you're like, they're real. We're done.
So the story that I've heard from people outside of, basically just other people that after I released this video, is that video apparently had been seen by a lot of people in the intelligence community, and a lot of people saw it live, and so which is why I think that if it was not in the location that was explained to me, that probably would have come forward. So, but and so I'm all willing to receive any information about that object, but at the end of the day, one of the points that I was trying to make is that because we're being so secretive about this topic, and we're not being transparent with the American people, you could take a video like that, and everyone is going to assume the worst. They're going to assume
Correct.
some of these other things. And so it's time that we start getting some answers, so that, because the truth is, the American people don't trust this government anymore. They don't trust us to be honest with them, to be transparent. And I think that, I mean, that's my responsibility to try to change that. It's kind of like wrestling a pig, but it's going to be, at least it's the effort that I'm engaged in.
They were ghosts. Who are these guys?
I've never heard this before.
Right behind me, we have armed police. They're ready for sort of riot patrol.
I'm Sean Ryan, and I'm hosting the new Ironclad original, Target Intelligence PSYOP.
We're not framing history correctly.
Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs, yes or no?
Yes.
It's an Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
Also this year, Andy got an opportunity to sit down with national security expert Nicholas Eftimiadis about why China is buying up land around American military bases. Here's a portion of that conversation.
And I have no idea if this is true, and I'm hoping that you would know that there is an effort for China to buy land around military installations. Have you heard people talking about this? Is there any legitimacy to that?
In fact, I have a list of all the land that they purchased in the United States and how many acres and where they are.
Why would we allow that? I mean, it's just like, come on, guys.
Well, I got to tell you that China's main focus on this is not, I mean, they own Smithfield Ham, right? Yeah. So they own the largest pork distributor in the world. They own. So all those farms and all that, those facilities and slaughterhouses and stuff, they own. So it's not for them. Look, they buy farmland. Well, guess what? Where the hell do we put military bases but way out in the middle of nowhere, right? So
unless you're in the Navy, oceanfront property, baby.
Right. So, so not a surprise there. Espionage, while they certainly can conduct it, and there are a couple of key things that they benefit for in being in a proximity near a military base. If you're in the downlink of a satellite going down to a military base, if you're in that immediate area, you're certainly going to catch the downlink, which you normally wouldn't. If it's long wave radio that they're communicating out to ships or something like that, and if you're in that wavelength that's being transmitted and received, you're going to be able to capture those emanations as well. There's physical observation of a base, but the real point of this whole thing has less to do with espionage than it has to do with China's feeding its population. China only has 15% arable land. And when you're talking about a population of over 1 billion people, they have to import, period. They have to. If they're not importing food, they're starving. 70% of the world's seafood is consumed in Asia. Okay, over the entire planet, 70% is consumed, and the vast majority of that is the rising middle class in China, which is why China is claiming ownership of the South China Sea. It's got nothing to do with their ownership. There are two things the South China Sea has. It has food, which it needs for its population, and it has oil and gas reserves, natural gas and oil reserves. And if you build one nuclear plant a week in China for the next 20 years, you still won't meet their energy needs, assuming their growth as it's going now. So it's a desperate need for farmland, arable farmland to grow and to ship back to China, right? We don't want to be hostage to the U.S., so we'll put our own companies there and let our own companies grow, and our own companies will ship back, right? That way we don't play with the U.S. That's the plan from their
spoken hub model, yeah.
Yeah. just the fact that it's in proximity to a military base and there might be some benefit of that, great. I'm sure they're thrilled about it. But at a higher level, it's feeding their population and the economy. It's actually driving their military to claim control of the South China Sea. It's the resources that they need.
Well, I'm sure they're fishing it in a highly regulated way.
All right, so you may know Mike Rowe as the host of shows like Dirty Jobs, but his real passion is getting more Americans involved in the trades. He came to Change Agents to talk to Andy about why it's actually a national security issue. Here's Mike Rowe.
I got to say, I've been a fan of your work for quite some time. You have provided for me countless hours of entertainment and helped me select career paths that I never wanted to go down.
Interesting. Which was the path that you ultimately embraced as a result?
I mean, let's be honest. I had the shittiest job ever known to man in the military. It just was defined by its pain and suffering at times, both physically and emotionally. And for me, I mean, I viewed your show often, specifically Dirty Jobs, a lot of times when I was in the military, just as like a touch point of like what's going on in the rest of the world, because we were so detached from a large perspective post 9/11. You'd get a little bit of time off. Like, I am going to veg out for a little bit and see what other people are doing with their time, and then watch you climb into constricted areas, come out covered in all variety of things, and be very grateful that I had the job that I did.
Well, it's funny, man. I do a fair amount of work with the military these days, and part of the reason is because that show was programmed almost exclusively by the viewers. They all had ideas. People would see that and they're like, oh man, you think that's dirty? Wait till you meet my brother, my cousin, my sister, whatever. The amount of mail I got from overseas, from guys like you, usually about burn pits, but it could be anything. They were like, they saw me do something and it reminded them of a thing that they just did or were about to do. And I mean, that's before I realized, I guess it was the Armed Service Network or whatever, but Discovery was there in a big way. So Dirty Jobs, Deadliest Catch.
Yep.
Virtually everything I was working on in those days was just being blasted right into your eyeballs. So yeah, I felt like I was there with you, Andy.
It was limited programming, but the programming was good. I mean, it would be funny. Yeah, you would just see guys just kind of decompressing, watching people just, literally covered in shit sometimes. Like, wow, our job is not that bad. We're going to be okay.
Well, good, man. I'm flattered. I hope I
No, it was good. It's cool to finally connect with you. One of the things I actually deeply appreciate about what you say often is when you talk about the trades. So my dad was a stonemason in Santa Cruz, and I grew up from a super young age, probably working for him illegally. I know he wasn't paying me enough at the very least, and I am positive he violated every workman's comp policy and law with the things that he asked me to do. But, what an appreciation for hard work and seeing the trades, always around carpenters, plumbers, electricians, all of these things. And I did not go to college. I barely graduated high school. I like to say I set the bar low and tripped over it on my way into the military. Fortunately, their entry requirement wasn't incredibly high. But I have 3 of my own children now, and I've watched as my peer group grew in age, had kids, and these conversations around college. You have to go to college. If you don't go to college, you have less value to society. It's the only way to guarantee going forward. And I always have come back and appreciated how you feel about the trades, and you think the role that the trades have in U.S. society, because I think that they are the backbone and framework of a lot of what we have.
Well, for sure. As is the military, as are our farmers. But the thing is, most people, we wind up, first of all, we lose just a sense of wonder and appreciation for like the miracle of electricity and indoor plumbing and infrastructure. But we wind up resenting the very thing we depend on, because, a really skilled tradesman will remind a lot of people simply through being skilled that they are not skilled, and that we wind up depending on a mechanic and an electrician. We depend on the plumber, the HVAC guy to come and help us when it's too cold or the hot water doesn't come on, or, these are not things most people can deal with themselves. So we've become reliant on our workforce, even as it's shrunk. In the same way we're reliant, look, what's the percentage now? 1.5% of the country serves in the military. 1.5% of the country. How much?
0.05%.
0.5 now, right?
Yep.
Farmers, I guess, is closer to like 1.2, 1.3. But yeah, like these are groups of people that we're all totally reliant on. And I would put the skilled trades in there as well. And the relationship between the 300 million people who really depend on that section of the workforce it is busted, and it's dysfunctional. And nowhere better can you see that dysfunction than in this idea that if you don't go to college, you're going to somehow be screwed with some vocational consolation prize. That's a very powerful feeling, and it's been passed down to a whole generation of kids. And people say to me all the time, Mike, how did college get so expensive? It's like, well, how could it not? We took shop class out of high school. We told a whole generation of kids they were doomed if they didn't borrow whatever it took to go get the piece of paper that will allow them to do the thing that will make them happy. It's all such nonsense. And if you flash all that forward today, Jesus, what is it? $1.7 trillion in student debt on the books, 7.6 million open jobs, most of which don't require a 4-year degree, and 6.8 million men, able-bodied, prime-aged working men, not only not in the workforce, but not even looking. So the whole thing is like a recipe for something not good. And it's the reason why I get calls every week. The Blue Forge Alliance just called me. You know, the guys who oversee the companies that make our submarines. They're looking to hire 140,000 tradespeople.
What?
The next 140,000. So they got 2 Virginia and 1 Delta class sub to deliver every year for the next 10 years. That's the cadence. These are nuclear powered subs.
Yeah.
You know the drill now. If things go hypersonic with China and Taiwan, our aircraft carriers are vulnerable in a huge way. The subs, it's the subs that are going to win the day, I think. And we can't make them fast enough. And they asked me, do you know where the tradespeople are? We need 140,000. I said, yeah, man, I know where they are. They're in the 8th grade.
You know, there's a core tenet of special operations, and I don't know who to apply the quote to, but it essentially says you cannot mass produce them. So it's something that takes time, it takes money, and it takes an investment. And yeah, you either get in front of the problem early or you have a really big problem that you're trying to play catch up. And I'm curious your thoughts with this many people reaching out or an organization like that asking you that question. Should the government or the public education system or the media, do you think should they have a role in changing the lexicon and how we view the trades?
Yeah, they should, but they're not a panacea. And I've had a lot of conversations with governors and cabinet members about how to change the stigmas, stereotypes, myths, and misperceptions that keep millions of people from exploring careers in these trades. I talk about it all the time, but there is no single source that's going to be able to do that. You're really talking about PR. It's like an anti-smoking campaign. Or, the better example is littering. The country had a really dysfunctional relationship with littering back in the 70s and 80s, way before green and before, all the environmental stuff got politicized. We were just pigs. We left our shit behind all the time. There was no stigma attached to littering. And so the National Ad Council and the government, with some NGOs and some concerned citizens, raised a bunch of money and hired Iron Eyes Cody, an Indian who was really an Italian actor. You're probably too young to remember, but they dressed him up like an Indian, and he stood on the side of the road and wept as people threw their crap out the window and it landed at his feet. And they also had shots of him paddling his canoe through rivers that were just choked with pollution and litter. And the tagline was, people start pollution, people can stop it. And this was super powerful, and the government was involved. And it was one of the few ad campaigns that actually changed behavior. I only mention it because the same thing needs to happen in some corollary around the skilled trades. we need to change the messaging and the stigmas. Like once we took shop class out of high school, we basically sent a real clear message to a whole generation of kids that these jobs aren't even worth looking at. They're not even worth walking down the hallway on the way from English to arithmetic or whatever, to stick your head in there to see somebody fabricating wood or metal or auto shop or whatever it was. And so, how do you get that dignity back? How do you get people to think about, the appreciation and the gratitude that needs to exist in the country in order for a generation of kids to say, hey, I think maybe I will learn how to be a plumber, maybe how to be an electrician. It has to start with aspiration, has to start with appreciation. And if we don't have a collective appreciation for our military, our farmers, our tradespeople, then we're going to wind up exactly where we are right now, profoundly disconnected from a whole bunch of jobs. Look, I'm rooting for the president. I want to see manufacturing reshored. I want to see us start to make things again on a grand scale. But there are 500,000 open jobs in manufacturing right now.
Yeah.
What are we going to do if we successfully open more factories? Where's the workforce? That's why the Blue Forge story is important. Those guys are looking for the same 140,000 men and women as the automotive industry, who's looking for 70,000 right now. Collision and repair. It's just, you get down the list, man. This is one of the great untold stories in the history of work. And it's happening right in front of us.
All right, everyone. Hey, thank you so much for watching Change Agents in 2025. Andy has so many killer interviews that are lined up for 2026 already. That'll do it for this time. Happy New Year, everyone.